I stared at the check in my trembling hands, the final payment for the house my son had no idea I was buying. After months of wiping his children's tears while he ignored mine, after cooking meals I wasn't invited to eat, after being treated like hired help instead of family, I had finally reclaimed my dignity. Tomorrow, I would hand him the new lease, not as his forgotten mother, but as his landlord. The antique grandfather clock in my living room chimed 3 times, its deep resonance, filling the modest 2-bedroom cottage I'd called home for 32 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My fingers traced the small brass nameplate on its face. Margaret and Harold Sullivan, 1974. A wedding gift that had outlasted the marriage itself by nearly 2 decades. Harold had left when our son Daniel was just 14, claimed he needed space to breathe. The irony wasn't lost on me now, as I found myself gasping for air in a life that had slowly constricted around me. Rose from my worn floral armchair, the one Daniel always complained made the living room look dated, and moved to the kitchen to prepare my afternoon tea. Earl Grey, 1 sugar cube, a splash of milk. The routine was comforting in its predictability. My life had been full of such predictable moments, until 6 months ago when everything changed. The kitchen window faced east, catching the afternoon sun as it filtered through the massive oak tree in my yard. Through its branches, I could just make out the for sale sign that had been posted yesterday. My neighbor Elaine had nearly choked on her coffee when I told her over our weekly Thursday morning chat. Selling? But Margaret, you've been here since Daniel was in diapers. I had simply nodded, sipping my coffee. It's time for a change, I'd said, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. At 67, change wasn't something people expected from you. They expected quiet contentment, gradual decline, grateful acceptance of whatever scraps of attention your adult children tossed your way. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Daniel. No greeting, just, "Can you take the kids tomorrow?" Emergency at work. Jenny has a presentation. Drop off 7:30 a.m. Not, would you mind? Not, if it's not too much trouble. Just an assumption that I would rearrange my day, as I had nearly every day since they'd moved back to town 8 months ago. I typed back yes, because despite everything, I loved my grandchildren. Lily, 7, and James, 4, were bright spots in an increasingly dim existence. Their smiles still reached their eyes when they saw me, unlike their parents. I returned to my armchair with my tea, picking up the small photo album I'd been sorting through. It was part of the process, deciding what to keep, what to give away, what to simply let go of. Daniel as a toddler, gap-toothed and beaming on his first bicycle. Daniel at his high school graduation, arms slung around my shoulders. Daniel's wedding to Jenny, both of them looking at each other with such hope and promise. The photos grew sparser after that. A few of the grandchildren as babies, then almost nothing for the past few years. It was as if our family narrative had split into separate streams, theirs rushing forward without me, mine slowing to a trickle of solitary days. I hadn't planned on becoming invisible. After retirement from 30 years of teaching 3rd grade, I'd envisioned book clubs and volunteer work, perhaps some travel. Instead, the first year had passed in a fog of uncertainty. What was I without my classroom, my students, my purpose? Then came Daniel's phone call, his voice unnaturally bright as he shared the great news that they were moving back to our hometown. Jenny had received a lucrative job offer at the regional hospital as head of pediatric nursing. They'd be renting at first, saving for their forever home. "We'll be just 20 minutes away, Mom," he'd said. "The kids will finally get to see you regularly." I'd cried after hanging up. Happy tears, I thought then. 3 weeks after they'd settled in, the requests began. Could I watch the children while they unpacked? Could I pick Lily up from school when Jenny worked late? Would I mind keeping James all day Tuesday since daycare was so expensive? Each favor requested with less ceremony than the last, until they became expectations, then obligations. I set down my tea and picked up the most recent addition to my photo collection, a printout from the real estate listing. The Willow Creek Townhomes, modern, maintenance-free living for active adults. It had taken nearly all my savings, but the small 2-bedroom unit would be mine in 30 days. It was across town, a solid 40-minute drive from Daniel's rental house. That rental house. The 2-story colonial with the cracked driveway and overgrown rose bushes. The house that had appeared in Daniel's complaints almost daily. The landlord won't fix the dishwasher. The fence needs replacing, but the property management company won't return our calls. We're paying too much for what we get. I'd nodded sympathetically while preparing their children's lunches, while folding their laundry, while essentially running their household without so much as a thank you. I'd listened as Jenny made comments about my outdated clothes, as Daniel suggested I might want to try those senior activities at the community center to get out more. As if I didn't want to get out more. As if having time for myself was even an option anymore. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. I glanced at the clock, 4:15 p.m. Too early for Daniel to be dropping off the children. I set down the photo album and adjusted my cardigan before opening the door. Martin Hayes, my financial advisor of 20 years, stood on the porch holding a manila envelope. His salt and pepper beard had more salt these days, but his eyes still carried the same kind intelligence I'd come to rely on. "Margaret," he said warmly. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Martin. Come in." I stepped aside to let him enter. "Tea?" "No, thank you. This won't take long." He settled onto the sofa as I returned to my armchair. "I have the paperwork for the Willow Creek property. Just need your signature on a few things." He paused, studying my face. "Are you absolutely certain about this move? It's a significant change." I felt a flicker of the old hesitation, the instinct to prioritize everyone's comfort but my own. Then I remembered yesterday, standing in Daniel's kitchen after watching the children all day, preparing a lasagna for their dinner while Jenny scrolled through her phone at the counter. "Mom," she'd said without looking up, "we're thinking of redoing the guest room as a home gym, so we might need to store some of your old furniture in your basement. That china cabinet and those bookcases take up so much space." My mother's china cabinet. The bookcases Harold had built when we first married. "Those are heirlooms," I'd said, quietly. "For the children someday." Jenny had glanced up then, expression a mix of pity and impatience. "No offense, Margaret, but nobody wants that dated stuff anymore. The kids will have our things." I'd continued stirring the sauce, saying nothing as the wall between us and my place in their lives grew one brick higher. "Yes," I told Martin now, my voice steady. "I'm certain." He nodded, opening the envelope and spreading the documents on the coffee table. As I reached for the pen, my gaze fell on the real estate section of the morning newspaper I'd set aside earlier. The listing caught my eye again. The colonial house's address printed in bold, the "for rent potential sale" heading above the grainy photo. An idea took shape, so audacious I nearly dismissed it immediately. But something kept my eyes on that listing. Something that felt remarkably like the spark of life returning. "Martin," I said slowly, "before we finalize Willow Creek, I'd like to discuss another investment possibility." I could pinpoint the exact moment my world tilted on its axis, when the comfortable patterns of my life rearranged themselves into something unrecognizable. It wasn't when Daniel called about moving back to town, nor when I first realized I'd become their unpaid nanny. It was on a rain-drenched Tuesday, 3 weeks ago. I'd been watching James all day. Lily was at school, and I had promised to pick her up at 3:15. James had caught a mild cold. Nothing serious, just enough to keep him home from daycare. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'd spent the morning reading to him, making soup, and monitoring his temperature. By afternoon, his fever had broken, and he was napping peacefully on my couch, wrapped in the blue throw blanket I'd knitted when Daniel was born. My phone chimed with a text from Jenny. Need you to keep Jay overnight. Work crisis. We'll explain later. Another text arrived moments later, this one from Daniel. Mom, can you also grab Lily early? Teacher conference day. Forgot to tell you, school releases at 1:30. I glanced at the clock, 1:17 p.m. My chest tightened. 13 minutes to drive across town, in the rain, with a sick child. I quickly wrapped James in his blanket, ignoring his sleepy protests as I buckled him into his car seat. The rain hammered against my windshield as I navigated the slick roads, anxiety building with each minute that ticked by. We arrived at 1:43. Lily stood alone under the school's awning, her small shoulders hunched, pink raincoat speckled with droplets where she'd ventured out to look for me. When she saw my car, her face crumpled. You're late, Grandma, she said as she climbed in, her voice small. Everyone else is gone. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, I said, reaching back to squeeze her hand. Daddy just told me about the early release. Lily's expression shifted. But Mrs. Wilson called everyone's parents yesterday. She made us practice saying early release 5 times so we wouldn't forget. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They had known. They had simply forgotten to tell me, or worse, hadn't bothered because they assumed I would adapt to whatever they needed, whenever they needed it. That evening, after Lily had finished her homework and both children were asleep in my spare bedroom, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, waiting. No call from Daniel or Jenny explaining the crisis. No text asking how the children were doing. The silence spoke volumes. Just after 10 p.m., my phone rang. Jenny's voice came through, artificially bright. Margaret, how are the kids? They're fine, I said, keeping my voice neutral. James's fever is gone. Lily finished her math homework. Great, great, Jenny replied, the sounds of restaurant chatter and clinking glasses in the background. Listen, Daniel and I finally got reservations at Bella Terra. We're thinking we'll just pick the kids up tomorrow morning on our way to work, if that's okay? I glanced at the clock, at the children's backpacks I'd already packed for tomorrow, at the lunch I'd prepared for James to take to daycare. I'd canceled my monthly book club meeting to accommodate this unexpected overnight stay. The work crisis is resolved then? I asked quietly. A pause. What? Oh, yes, all handled. Another pause, then Jenny's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Between us, it wasn't really a crisis. An opportunity came up for networking with the hospital board. Too good to pass up, you know? And Daniel managed to join me. We're celebrating. The cavalier admission stunned me into silence. Margaret? You there? Yes, I managed. I'll see you tomorrow morning. After hanging up, I sat motionless at my kitchen table, the house quiet except for the steady ticking of the grandfather clock. Something was breaking loose inside me. Not grief or anger, but clarity. Sharp, undeniable clarity. I'd spent decades building my life around caring for others. My students for 30 years. My son for even longer. Now my grandchildren. It was who I was, who I'd always been. But somewhere along the way, caring had transformed into servitude. My willingness to help had become an expectation that I would always be available, always accommodating, always placing myself last. The next morning, Daniel and Jenny arrived just before 8 a.m., both dressed immaculately for work. Jenny's designer handbag matched her shoes perfectly. Daniel's tie was the exact shade of blue I'd had to special order for Lily's school uniform. These details registered with me as never before. The carefully curated appearance of success built partly on my invisible labor. Thanks, Mom, Daniel said, barely glancing at me as he shepherded the children toward their car. Same time tomorrow? It wasn't really a question. Actually, I heard myself say, I can't tomorrow. I have an appointment. Daniel turned, blinking. In surprise. An appointment? What kind of appointment? A personal one, I replied, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. Jenny frowned. Well, can't you reschedule? We both have important meetings tomorrow. I'm sorry, but no. It's been on my calendar for weeks. The lie came easily, necessary self-protection forming like a callus. Daniel's expression darkened. Mom, we're really in a bind here. Can't you help us out? You're retired. It's not like you have anywhere urgent to be. The words struck like a physical blow. In that moment, I saw myself through my son's eyes. A convenience, a resource, a backup plan with no plans of her own worth considering. I'll see what I can do, I said finally, retreating into the safety of acquiescence. But inside, something had shifted irrevocably. That afternoon, I called Martin Hayes and asked him to move up our meeting. When he arrived the next day, the day of my fabricated appointment, I was ready. Tell me about investment properties, I said after we'd settled in my living room. Martin raised his eyebrows. That's a change from our usual conversations about safe retirement funds. I'm considering a change in strategy. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Rental properties can provide steady income, but they come with responsibilities. Management, maintenance, dealing with tenants. What if the tenant is someone you know? I interrupted. Martin's expression shifted from surprise to understanding. Margaret, are you thinking what I think you're thinking? I handed him the real estate listing I'd saved, Daniel's rental house, now being offered for sale by the investment company that owned it. Is this wise? Martin asked gently. Mixing family and business can be complicated. Family is already complicated, I replied. I'm just changing the terms. Martin was quiet for a long moment, then opened his briefcase and removed his laptop. Let's run the numbers and see if this makes financial sense at least. As he typed, I felt an unfamiliar sensation spreading through me, not the warm glow of satisfaction from helping others, but something cooler and more defined. Power. Not power over others, but power over my own life, my own choices. The numbers were tight but feasible. With my savings, the sale of my house, and a small mortgage, I could purchase the Colonial. The rental income would cover my new apartment at Willow Creek and provide a modest additional income. If you're serious about this, Martin said as he packed up his laptop, I'll make some calls. But Margaret, he paused at the door, his expression concerned. Be sure this is about financial security and not about making a point. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. Why, can't it be both? After he left, I stood in my living room, surrounded by the artifacts of my life. The grandfather clock continued its steady rhythm, marking the seconds of a decision that had been years in the making without my knowledge. A decision to value myself as much as I had always valued others. I picked up my phone and texted Daniel, Can't watch the children tomorrow after all. My appointment can't be rescheduled. His response came immediately. Mom, we're counting on you. What appointment could possibly be this important? I set the phone down without answering and walked to the window. The for sale sign in my yard caught the last rays of afternoon sun, gleaming like a promise. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that had always energized me during my teaching years. I dressed with unusual care. A deep blue sweater I'd been saving for special occasions, my good slacks, a touch of lipstick. My appointment might have been fabricated, but my preparation for change was very real. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone rang, Daniel's number flashing on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering, a small act of reclamation. Mom? His voice held that mixture of impatience and charm he'd perfected as a teenager asking for car keys. I've been calling since 7. I was in the shower, I lied easily, getting ready for my appointment. A heavy sigh traveled through the line. About that, Jenny's really in a bind today. The sitter we found last minute canceled, and her presentation to the hospital board. I'm sorry to hear that, I interrupted, surprised by my own firmness. But as I mentioned yesterday, I have plans that can't be changed. Silence then. What exactly is this appointment, Mom? Is everything okay? You're not sick, are you? The sudden concern in his voice almost made me waver. Almost. I recognized the tactic. His worry wasn't about my health, but about losing his safety net. I'm perfectly fine, Daniel. I'm meeting with Martin about some financial restructuring. Martin. Hayes? The investment guy? His tone shifted immediately. Is there something wrong with your finances? Because if you're struggling, you should have said something. I'm not struggling, I said. Just making some changes. What kind of changes? Personal ones. My turn to deploy that useful word. He exhaled sharply. Well, we're really stuck here, Mom. I guess I'll have to call in sick to stay with the kids. I suppose you will. I kept my voice neutral, though my heart hammered in my chest. This small rebellion felt monumental. This isn't like you, he said finally, accusation threading through his tone. Perhaps you don't know me as well as you think. I ended the call before he could respond, my hands trembling slightly as I set the phone down. I spent the day with Martin, signing preliminary paperwork for an offer on the colonial house and meeting with my own real estate agent about listing my cottage. By late afternoon, pieces were falling into place with surprising speed. The investment company that owned Daniel's rental had received multiple complaints about maintenance issues and was eager to sell. It's a highly motivated seller, Martin explained as we walked the property's perimeter, staying well away from the house itself. I'd timed our visit for when I knew Daniel and Jenny would be at work and the children at school. They're asking less than market value to unload it quickly. Studied the colonial from behind large sunglasses. It was a handsome property despite its neglect. Solid bones beneath the peeling paint and sagging gutters. 4 bedrooms, a generous backyard with those overgrown rose bushes, and a location in one of the best school districts in town. Property. Values here would likely increase in the coming years. How quickly could this happen? I asked. With an all-cash offer and an eager seller? 2 weeks, maybe less. 2 weeks. The timeline made my breath catch. In 2 weeks, I could transform from the convenient grandmother to the property owner, from servant to landlord. Let's do it, I said. Martin nodded, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. I'll submit the offer this afternoon. And Margaret, he added as we turned to leave. What are you going to tell Daniel? I watched a squirrel dart across the cracked driveway, disappearing into the tangled branches of a neglected apple tree. Nothing yet. Let's see if the offer is accepted first. That evening, my phone buzzed continuously with texts from Daniel and Jenny, alternating between subtle accusations and passive-aggressive gratitude for my years of help. I responded minimally, pleading fatigue from my busy day. Another small rebellion, another fragment of myself reclaimed. 3 days later, Martin called with news. My offer had been accepted. Congratulations, he said. You're about to become a landlord. We need to move quickly on the paperwork. And Margaret, you need to decide how you're going to handle the current tenants. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of chamomile tea cooling before me. The weight of what I was doing settled around my shoulders, not as a burden, but as a mantle of authority I hadn't worn in years. I'll need a proper lease drawn up, I said. Something that reflects current market rates. The current rent they're paying is below market, Martin noted. You could legally increase it by about 15%. The thought was tempting, not for the money, but for the statement it would make. Then I thought of Lily and James, who were innocent in all this. I didn't want to create financial strain that would affect them. Keep it at the current rate, I decided. But the lease should specify limits on maintenance requests and clearly outline tenant versus landlord responsibilities. That sounds fair, Martin agreed. I'll have my contact at the law firm draw something up. And Margaret, he hesitated. When are you planning to tell them? After the closing, I said firmly. Not before. The next week passed in a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and careful evasions. I returned to my role as on-call babysitter, but with subtle differences that only I noticed. I no longer rushed to accommodate last-minute requests. I declined evening babysitting twice, citing previous commitments. I stopped doing their laundry when I watched the children, stopped preparing elaborate meals for them to heat later. Small changes, but they felt enormous. Daniel and Jenny seemed too preoccupied to notice these shifts. They were focused on their own ambitions, Jenny's promotion track at the hospital, Daniel's pitch for a significant new client at his marketing firm. My presence in their lives remained functional, not familial. On Thursday afternoon, I received an email from Martin with documents attached. The closing was scheduled for Monday morning. By noon that day, I would officially own the colonial house. That same evening, Daniel called. Not with a babysitting request, but with news. Mom, guess what? The rental company called today. They've sold the house. My heart lurched. Oh? Did they say to whom? Some investment group, apparently. They're sending over a representative on Monday with a new lease. Jenny's freaking out a little, worried they'll raise the rent or make us move. But I told her it'll be fine. These corporate landlords only care about steady income, not micromanaging tenants. The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. I murmured something appropriate about hoping it worked out well, then changed the subject. I have some news too, I said. I've accepted an offer on my house. It sold more quickly than I expected. Wait, what? Daniel's shock was evident. You're actually selling? I thought you were just testing the market. The cottage is too big for just me, I said, the lie settling uncomfortably. I've found a nice apartment at Willow Creek. The senior community? Mom, you're not that old. Besides, it's all the way across town. How will you watch the kids? There it was, his first concern, not for my well-being or happiness, but for how my decision would impact his convenience. I suppose we'll have to figure something out, I said mildly. Change is part of life, Daniel. But why now? Everything was working so well with our arrangement. Working well for whom? I wanted to ask. Instead, I said, I need to make some changes for myself. We can talk more about it soon. After ending the call, I stood by the kitchen window, watching. Darkness settle over my garden. The for sale sign now sported a bright red, sold banner across its face. Behind me, the grandfather clock ticked steadily, marking the final hours of one chapter of my life and the approaching dawn of another. Monday morning couldn't come soon enough. Monday morning arrived with a crystalline clarity to the air, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed too beautiful for the anxiety churning in my stomach. I dressed carefully in a tailored navy pantsuit I hadn't worn since my retirement dinner 3 years ago. It still fit, though perhaps a bit more snugly around the waist, a physical reminder of how time had passed while I remained in a holding pattern. The closing was scheduled for 10 a.m. at Martin's office downtown. I arrived 20 minutes early, my hands clutching my purse so tightly my knuckles had gone white. The receptionist offered me coffee, which I declined. My nerves were already frayed enough without caffeine. Margaret, Martin greeted me warmly as he emerged from his office. Today's the day. Are you ready? I nodded, not entirely trusting my voice. He must have sensed my apprehension because he gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze before leading me into the conference room. The seller's representative, a polished young woman from the investment company, was already seated at the table, papers arranged in neat stacks before her. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Vanessa Chen. We're delighted to complete this transaction so smoothly." The next hour passed in a blur of signatures and initials, Martin guiding me through each document with patient expertise. When the final paper was signed, Vanessa handed me a set of keys. "Congratulations on your investment property," she said with a professional smile. "The tenants have been informed that new ownership takes effect today. Our property management company will transfer all security deposits and October's rent payment to your account by the end of business tomorrow." I stared at the keys in my palm, ordinary metal objects that now represented something extraordinary. Power. Not power over Daniel and Jenny specifically, but power over my own life. Power to make choices based on my needs rather than everyone else's expectations. "Margaret?" Martin's voice broke through my thoughts. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I said, closing my fingers around the keys. "I'm ready for the next step." Martin had arranged for his colleague, Stephanie, a no-nonsense real estate attorney, to accompany me to the colonial house. She would introduce herself as my representative and present the new lease to Daniel and Jenny. The plan was for me to remain in the car until Stephanie texted that it was an appropriate time to reveal my involvement. "Remember," Stephanie cautioned as we drove toward the colonial, "this is a business transaction now. Try to separate your emotions from the financial aspects." I nodded, though we both knew it wasn't that simple. Nothing about this was simple. We arrived at 3 p.m., exactly when Jenny had confirmed she'd be home. I parked half a block away, sunglasses on, heart racing as Stephanie walked confidently up the cracked driveway to the front door with her briefcase in hand. Through the open car window, I could hear the distant sound of the doorbell, then the door opening. Stephanie disappeared inside. I checked my watch, 3:02 p.m. Time seemed to crawl as I waited, watching a neighborhood child ride past on a bicycle, an elderly man walking his terrier on the opposite sidewalk. Normal life continuing while mine balanced on a precipice. My phone buzzed at 3:17 p.m. Stephanie's text read simply, "Good time to come now." With trembling legs, I emerged from the car and walked toward the house that was now, incredibly, mine. The front door stood ajar, Stephanie's voice drifting from inside along with Jenny's higher, increasingly agitated tone. Completely unreasonable. "To introduce these changes with no warning," Jenny was saying as I stepped into the foyer. "We've been model tenants." "The terms are standard," Stephanie replied calmly. "The owner simply wants clarity about responsibilities moving forward." They were in the living room, Jenny standing with arms crossed, Stephanie seated calmly on the edge of a beige sofa I'd never seen before. The room had been rearranged since my last visit, with new curtains and a large abstract painting I didn't recognize. Jenny turned at the sound of my footsteps, her expression morphing from irritation to confusion. "Margaret? What are you doing here?" Stephanie stood. "Mrs. Sullivan is the new owner of this property." The silence that followed was absolute. Jenny's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That's not possible," she finally managed. "I assure you." "It is," Stephanie said, lifting the deed from her briefcase and holding it where Jenny could see my name clearly printed. "Mrs. Sullivan has purchased this home as an investment property." Jenny's gaze darted between the document and my face, her complexion paling. "You bought our house? Without telling us?" "Your rental house," I corrected gently. "And yes, I did." She sank onto the sofa, the fight seemingly draining from her. "Does Daniel know about this?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I thought it best to discuss it with both of you together." As if summoned by his name, the front door opened and Daniel's voice called out, "Jenny, there's a car blocking the driveway." He stopped abruptly as he entered the living room, briefcase in hand, taking in the tableau before him. Jenny stunned on the sofa, Stephanie standing with papers, and me, his mother, looking more formidable than he had seen me in years. "Mom?" Confusion colored his tone. "What's going on?" Stephanie took charge, her professional demeanor a shield for all of us. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Stephanie Winters, representing your mother, who is now the owner of this property. I've just been reviewing the new lease with your wife." Daniel's expression shifted rapidly, confusion to disbelief to something approaching anger. "This is a joke, right?" "It's not," I said, finding strength in the simple truth. "I've purchased the house from Evergreen Investments." "With what money?" he demanded, setting his briefcase down with more force than necessary. "My money," I replied. "From savings and the sale of my house." "You sold your house? To buy our house?" His voice rose with each question. "Without discussing it with us? Without even mentioning it?" "When have you discussed your decisions with me, Daniel?" I asked quietly. "When have my opinions or needs factored into your plans?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that my heart ached momentarily. "This is insane! You can't just become our landlord." "Actually, I can," I said. "And I have." Jenny stood suddenly. "I need to call the school. The kids will be waiting for pickup." The school, the children. In the intensity of the moment, I had forgotten about Lily and James. A pang of guilt shot through me. They were innocent in all this. "I can get them," I offered automatically. Jenny's laugh was brittle. "And take them where? To your house that you've sold? Or here, where you're now apparently our landlord?" Her words struck home, highlighting the messy reality beneath my empowering decision. Where would I take them? My cottage was sold, my apartment at Willow Creek not yet ready. In executing my plan for independence, I had created complications I hadn't fully anticipated. "They can come here, of course," I said. "This is still their home." Jenny grabbed her purse from the counter. "I'll get them myself." She paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We need to figure out what to tell them about all this." After she left, Daniel and I faced each other across the living room. Stephanie a silent presence by the window? "Why?" he asked finally, his voice lower but tension still evident in every line of his body. "Why would you do this?" I took a deep breath. "Because I needed to change our relationship." "By becoming my landlord?" He gave a humorless laugh. "Most mothers just have a conversation when they're upset." "I tried conversations," I said. "For months. I've tried to communicate that I can't be your full-time unpaid childcare, that I have my own life to live. So, this is punishment? For asking for help with the kids?" "It's not punishment, Daniel. It's a boundary. And it wasn't just asking for help. It was expecting availability without consideration, gratitude, or respect." He shook his head. "This is completely out of proportion to whatever issues you think we had." "Is it?" I moved to the kitchen, where breakfast dishes still sat in the sink from that morning. I opened the refrigerator. Half of the containers inside were meals I had prepared. "I've been treated like hired help, not family. When was the last time you asked about my day, my plans, my life?" He followed me, leaning against the doorframe. "You're retired. I thought you wanted to be involved with the grandkids." "Involved? Yes. Exploited? No." The word hung in the air between us, harsh but honest. Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me. "Jenny's got the kids. They're going to her mother's for dinner." He sighed heavily. "So what happens now? You evict us out of spite?" "No one's being evicted," I said firmly. "The lease is standard. The rent remains the same. The only significant changes are clear guidelines about maintenance responsibilities and advance notice for any requests for my time with the children." Stephanie stepped forward, ever the professional. "Mr. Sullivan, I suggest you review the lease carefully. Your mother has been more than fair with the terms." Daniel took the document she offered, but didn't look at it. "And you're really moving? To Willow Creek? 40 minutes away?" I nodded. I need some distance, Daniel, for both our sakes. He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as his reliable mother, but as a woman with her own desires and determinations. The recognition in his eyes was painful to witness, the dawning understanding that he had taken for granted, the one person who had always put him first. "We should go," Stephanie said gently, touching my elbow. "Mr. Sullivan needs time to process this with his family." As we turned to leave, Daniel's voice stopped me at the door. "Mom?" I looked back, unsure what to expect. Anger, accusations, perhaps even apologies. "The maintenance issues," he said, his voice strangely formal. "The dishwasher really is broken. And the fence?" "Submit the requests in writing," I interrupted, my heart hardening again at his focus on practical matters rather than the emotional chasm between us. As specified in the lease. Outside in the fading afternoon light, I stood on the driveway looking back at the colonial house. My property now, indeed, if not in spirit. The victory I had anticipated felt hollow, complicated by the hurt in my son's eyes and the practical realities I hadn't fully considered. "Are you all right?" Stephanie asked as we walked toward her car. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I thought this would feel more satisfying," she supplied. "Resolved," I said finally. "I thought it would feel resolved." As we drove away, I watched the colonial recede in the side mirror until it disappeared from view. The property was mine now, but the deeper issues remained, transformed rather than resolved. I had changed the external dynamics, but the internal wounds, on both sides, remained raw and exposed. Martin had been right to ask if this was about financial security or making a point. The truth was messier than either option. It was about reclaiming power, yes, but power came with responsibilities I was only beginning to understand. The keys in my purse felt heavier than they had that morning, weighted now with the complexity of what I had set in motion. That night, with nowhere else to go, I checked into the Riverside Inn, a modest hotel on the outskirts of town. The room was clean but impersonal, with generic watercolor prints on the walls and a bedspread in a forgettable shade of beige. I sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by the 2 suitcases containing the belongings I'd deemed essential enough to keep with me during this transition. The grandfather clock was in storage, along with most of my furniture and keepsakes. The cottage would be officially transferred to its new owners in 3 days. My apartment at Willow Creek wouldn't be ready for another week. I existed in limbo, a woman between homes, between identities. I stared at my phone. No calls from Daniel. No texts from Jenny, not even a message about the children. The silence felt both accusatory and confirming. When I removed myself as a convenience, communication ceased entirely. Just after 9, my phone finally rang. I reached for it eagerly, then paused when I saw the name on the screen, Catherine Williams. My oldest friend, former teaching colleague, and confidant of 30 years. I had been so consumed with my plan that I hadn't spoken to her in weeks. "Margaret Sullivan, you'd better have a good explanation for dropping off the face of the earth," she said when I answered, her warm voice immediately filling me with a sense of comfort I hadn't realized I'd been missing. "Catherine," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I've done something dramatic." A beat of silence, then, "You've murdered someone and need help hiding the body?" Despite everything, I laughed. "Not quite that dramatic." "Then whatever it is, we'll figure it out." "Where are you? You sound terrible." I glanced around the hotel room. "The Riverside Inn, room 118. "Stay put. I'll be there in 20 minutes." Catherine arrived in 18 minutes, her silver hair windblown, carrying a bottle of wine and a bakery box. When I opened the door, she took one look at my face and enveloped me in a fierce hug before bustling past me into the room. "Well, this is depressing," she declared, surveying the bland decor. "Good thing I brought reinforcements." She set the wine and box on the small desk, then turned to face me with her hands on her hips. Start at the beginning and don't leave anything out. So I told her everything. The months of being taken for granted, the gradual erosion of boundaries, the rainy day revelation, the decision to buy Daniel's rental house, the confrontation that afternoon. As I spoke, Catherine opened the wine, poured us each a generous glass, and offered silent, steady support. When I finally finished, she took a long sip of her wine, then said, "Margaret Sullivan, you magnificent badass." I blinked. "You don't think I've lost my mind?" "Lost your mind?" "Honey, you found your spine." She leaned forward. "I've been watching you disappear into Daniel's life for years now, canceling our lunch dates, missing book club, always exhausted from running their household while they build. Their careers. I wanted to help," I said quietly. "Help, yes. Surrender your entire existence, no." She opened the bakery box, revealing slices of chocolate cake. "You're allowed to have your own life, Margaret. Your own priorities. Your own joy." I accepted the plate she handed me, the rich scent of chocolate momentarily distracting me from my churning thoughts. But the way I went about it, sneaking around, buying their house behind their backs, was it ideal? No. Was it necessary? Probably. Catherine's directness had always been her most refreshing quality. Would Daniel have listened if you'd just tried to talk to him again? I thought about it, remembering the dozens of gentle hints I'd dropped over months, the evasions and dismissals that followed. "No," I admitted. "He would have charmed and deflected until nothing changed." "Exactly. Some lessons require dramatic measures." She reached for my hand. "But Margaret, where will you go until your apartment is ready?" I gestured vaguely at the hotel room. "Here, I suppose." Catherine shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not. You're coming home with me." I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition. After Richard died, that house became too big anyway. I've got the entire guest suite sitting empty. Besides, she added with a wink, I could use the company. Tears pricked at my eyes, unexpected and overwhelming. "Thank you," I whispered. "That's what friends are for. Now eat your cake and tell me more about this Margaret 2.0 who buys houses to make a point." For the first time in months, perhaps years, I felt the simple pleasure of being seen and heard. Catherine didn't need anything from me. She wasn't calculating my usefulness or fitting me into a schedule. She simply wanted my company, my stories, my authentic self. The next morning, I checked out of the Riverside Inn and followed Catherine to her Victorian home in the historic district. Unlike my cottage, hers was grand and slightly eccentric, with a turret on one side and a wraparound porch lined with potted plants in various stages of thriving or failing. Richard always said I treated plants like science experiments. She explained as she helped me carry my suitcases up the front steps. "I'm trying to determine exactly how much neglect different species can tolerate." The guest suite was on the first floor, a spacious bedroom with an adjoining sitting room and private bath. Large windows overlooked Catherine's wild English garden, where late roses still bloomed alongside overgrown herbs and vegetables gone to seed. "It's perfect," I said, genuinely touched by her generosity. "It's practical," she countered with typical practicality. "I've been trying to convince you to be my roommate for years. Now I've got you for at least a week." After settling in, we fell into an easy rhythm. Catherine still worked part-time as a curriculum consultant, so her mornings were occupied with Zoom calls and emails. I found myself wandering through her house, studying the art on her walls, vibrant abstracts and local landscapes, and the overflowing bookshelves that occupied nearly every room. In her kitchen, I discovered a neglected sourdough starter in the back of her refrigerator. On impulse, I fed it, watching throughout the day as it bubbled back to life. By evening, I had prepared a bouilli of rustic bread that filled the house with a yeasty, comforting aroma. "It smells like heaven in here," Catherine declared when she emerged from her home office. I'd forgotten about that starter. Richard used to maintain it. "Sourdough is forgiving," I said, slicing the warm bread. "It just needs regular attention and care." "Unlike children," Catherine observed wryly, "who often take regular attention and care for granted." We ate dinner on her back porch, watching fireflies emerge in the twilight garden. The bread was crusty and tangy, perfect with the vegetable soup I'd improvised from her pantry and the remnants of her garden. "You know," Catherine said, as she sopped up the last of her soup with a piece of bread, "I've missed this version of you, the Margaret who creates things for the joy of it, not just to care for others." I considered her words, realizing she was right. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped doing things simply because they brought me pleasure. Everything had become utilitarian, cooking to feed Daniel's family, gardening to provide fresh vegetables for the children, even reading to stay sharp for helping with Lily's homework. "Tell me about the apartment at Willow Creek," Catherine prompted. "What made you choose it?" I described the light-filled two-bedroom unit with its small balcony overlooking a community garden. "It's nothing special," I concluded, suddenly uncertain. "Just practical." Catherine tilted her head. "Is that what you want? Practical?" "I don't know what I want anymore," I admitted. "I just knew I couldn't continue as things were." "Well, that's a start," she said. "Knowing what you don't want is the first step to figuring out what you do want." My phone chimed with a text message. I glanced at it. A notification from the bank that a deposit had been made to my account. Daniel's rent payment, right on time. At least he was being professional about that aspect of our new relationship. "He paid the rent," I told Catherine. "But he still hasn't called," she shrugged. "He's processing. Men like Daniel don't adjust quickly when the power dynamic shifts. He's used to you accommodating him, not the other way around." What if he never speaks to me again? The fear that had been lurking beneath the surface finally emerged, raw and vulnerable. "He will," Catherine assured me. "Once he realizes you're serious about these changes. The question is, are you prepared to hold firm when he tries to charm his way back to the old arrangement?" I thought about the last 7 months, the exhaustion, the dismissals, the growing resentment. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with my certainty. "I can't go back to that. I won't." Catherine raised her wine glass. "To boundaries," she toasted. "Better late than never." The next few days with Catherine were healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. We fell into comfortable routines: morning coffee in her garden, afternoons spent helping her organize her home office or experimenting with new bread recipes. In the evenings, we watched old movies or read in companionable silence, occasionally sharing passages that struck us as particularly beautiful or true. It wasn't just the absence of demands that restored me, though that was certainly part of it. It was the presence of mutual respect. Catherine asked for my input, but never assumed my time was hers to command. She appreciated my contributions, but never expected them. Most importantly, she saw me as a complete person with my own desires, frustrations, and dreams, not merely as an extension of my role as mother and grandmother. On my 4th afternoon there, I was in Catherine's kitchen making a batch of oatmeal cookies when my phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it. For several rings, my heart racing. Catherine, who had been sorting through mail at the kitchen table, glanced up. "You don't have to answer." "I know," I said. But I did anyway. "Hello, Daniel." His voice sounded strained. "Mom, can we talk?" "We're talking now," I replied, careful to keep my tone neutral. "I mean in person, about everything that's happened." I closed my eyes briefly, centering myself. "All right, when and where?" Coffee? Tomorrow morning at Riverside Cafe? He paused. Just you and me. No lawyers. Despite myself, I smiled at his caveat. No lawyers, I agreed. 10 o'clock? 10 works. Another pause. Where are you staying? The hotel said you checked out. I hesitated, oddly reluctant to share even this small detail of my new life. I'm with Catherine Williams. You remember her from the school. Your friend with all the weird plants? Yeah, I remember. He cleared his throat. Mom, I've been thinking about everything, and I want to— Let's save it for tomorrow, I interrupted gently. Some conversations are better in person. After we hung up, I turned to find Catherine watching me with a mixture of concern and pride. Well? She prompted. We're meeting for coffee tomorrow. I returned to the cookie dough, focusing on shaping perfect rounds on the baking sheet. I'm not sure what to expect. Expect attempts to re-establish the old dynamic, Catherine advised. Be ready for guilt, charm, and nostalgia, his favorite tools. I nodded, recognizing the truth in her assessment. Those were indeed Daniel's preferred. Methods for getting his way, strategies he'd perfected since childhood. The question, Catherine continued, is what you want from this conversation. What's your best outcome? I considered this as I slid the cookies into the oven. What did I want? Not to punish Daniel, not to sever our relationship, but not to return to the way things had been either. I want him to see me, I said finally, not just as his mother or the children's grandmother, but as a person in my own right, someone with value beyond what I can do for him. Catherine smiled. That's a tall order. But if anyone deserves that recognition, it's you. That night, I lay awake in Catherine's guest room, watching moonlight filter through the curtains and cast dappled shadows on the wall. Tomorrow would test my resolve in ways I couldn't fully anticipate, but for the first time in months, I faced the challenge not from a place of depletion, but from one of unexpected strength. Whatever happened with Daniel, I had found a sanctuary, not just in Catherine's home, but in the rediscovery of my own worth, the worth that had always been there, waiting for me to reclaim it. The Riverside Cafe occupied the ground floor of a renovated mill building along the Merrimack River. I arrived 10 minutes early, selecting a table by the window where I could watch the water flow past while I waited. I ordered a black coffee, declining the barista's offer of their seasonal pumpkin pastries. My appetite had deserted me that morning, replaced by a nervous energy that had me smoothing my cardigan repeatedly and checking my watch every few minutes. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a pair of tailored slacks and a soft blue sweater that Catherine had declared, makes you look like someone who buys houses to teach lessons. Her approval had bolstered my confidence, which now wavered as I waited for Daniel to arrive. At precisely 10 o'clock, I spotted him through the window, striding purposefully toward the cafe entrance. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, his standard work attire, and carried his usual leather messenger bag. Always the marketing executive, even for coffee with his mother. He paused when he entered, scanning the room before his gaze settled on me. Something flickered across his face, recognition, tinged with uncertainty. For a moment, I saw him as a stranger might, a handsome, successful man in his early 40s, moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling his environment. My son, and yet in many ways, unknown to me. Mom, he said as he approached the table. He hesitated, then leaned down to kiss my cheek, a gesture that felt both habitual and strangely formal. Daniel, I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. Thank you for suggesting this. He sat, setting his bag on the floor beside him. You look different. I smiled slightly. I'm the same person I've always been. You're just seeing me differently now. A server approached, and Daniel ordered an Americano, waiting until she departed before continuing. So, you're staying with Mrs. Williams? Catherine, I corrected gently. Yes, until my apartment is ready next week. He nodded, fingers tapping, an irregular rhythm on the table. And you're really going through with this? Moving to Willow Creek? I am. Because of us? Because of what happened? I considered my words carefully. Partly. But also because it's time for me to make decisions based on my own needs, not just everyone else's. His coffee arrived, and he busied himself with adding a precise amount of sugar, stirring methodically. Mom, I've been thinking about everything, and I want to apologize. The words sounded rehearsed, as if he'd practiced them on the drive over. Still, I waited, giving him space to continue. Jenny and I, we got caught up in our own lives. We took advantage of your generosity. He looked up, making deliberate eye contact. We're sorry, and we want to make it right. 7 months of accumulated. Frustration stirred within me. What does making it right look like to you, Daniel? He leaned forward. We can work out a proper schedule for childcare, set clear expectations, maybe even pay you something for your time. So you still want me to watch the children? Well, yes. They miss you, Mom. Lily's been asking when she'll see you next. The mention of my granddaughter sent a pang through my heart. I miss them too. But Daniel, this isn't just about babysitting or schedules or even payment. He frowned slightly. Then what is it about? Because honestly, Mom, buying our house seems like an extreme reaction to what was essentially a communication problem. Your house? Or your rental? I couldn't help pointing out. He sighed. You know what I mean. I do, and that's part of the problem. You see your mother buying the property you rent as more extreme than treating her like an unpaid servant for months. Daniel flinched at the word servant, then his expression hardened. That's not fair. We never treated you like a servant, didn't you? I took a sip of my coffee, steadying myself. When was the last time you asked about my day, my interests, my life outside of what I could do for your family? He opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly searching for an example and coming up empty. When was the last time you invited me for dinner, not to cook it or clean up afterwards or watch the children, but simply to enjoy a meal with you? His silence was answer enough. I was invisible, Daniel. Useful, but not valued. Present, but not seen. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it momentarily disarmed me. That wasn't our intention. I know, I acknowledged. And that almost makes it worse. You didn't even realize what you were doing. We sat in silence for a moment, the ambient chatter of the cafe filling the space between us. Daniel stared into his coffee cup as if it might offer him a lifeline. So, where does this leave us? He finally asked. You're our landlord now. Our mother landlord. A hint of bitterness crept into his tone. Should I start calling you Mrs. Sullivan when I mail the rent check? Don't be dramatic, I said mildly. I'm still your mother. I still love you and the children. But our relationship needs to change. Into a business arrangement? He gestured vaguely, encompassing the invisible threads that connected us across the table. Into a relationship between adults who respect each other's boundaries, I corrected. The property is just a concrete representation of that boundary. Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me. It's work. I should probably... Go ahead, I said, unsurprised. This, too, was a pattern. Conversations that probed too deeply were often interrupted by the convenient demands of his career. He checked the message, his brow furrowing slightly. I need to respond to this. Just give me a second. As Daniel typed on his phone, I gazed out the window at the river flowing past. The water moved with purpose and certainty, finding its own path, reshaping the landscape through persistent presence rather than sudden force. I wanted to be like that river, steady, determined, gradually creating the life I wanted rather than accepting the one assigned to me. Sorry about that. Daniel said, setting his phone on the table. Where were we? Discussing boundaries, I reminded him. Right. He hesitated. Look, Mom, I understand you felt taken advantage of. We can fix that. But buying the house, moving, across town, it feels like you're cutting us out of your life. I'm creating space for myself in my life, I countered. There's a difference. His phone buzzed again. This time, he ignored it, but his gaze flickered toward it reflexively. I should let you get back to work, I said, reaching for my purse. No, it's fine. I want to finish this conversation. But even as he spoke, his phone lit up with an incoming call. Jenny, displayed prominently on the screen. Daniel sighed. I need to take this. It could be about the kids. I nodded, gathering my belongings as he answered. I could hear Jenny's voice, rapid and agitated, though I couldn't make out her words. Daniel's expression shifted, his professional mask slipping to reveal genuine alarm. When? He asked. Did they say how bad? Another pause. I'll be right there. He ended the call, already standing. There was a small kitchen fire at the house. Jenny came home for lunch and found the fire department there. The neighbor called it in. Fear shot through me. Is everyone all right? Was anyone home? Everyone's fine. Jenny said it was contained to the stove area, but there's smoke damage in the kitchen and dining room. He hesitated. I should go. Of course. I stood as well. Keep me updated. Let me know if there's anything I can do. Daniel paused, seeming to remember our new dynamic. Well, technically, it's your house that's damaged. I guess this is your problem as the landlord, right? The bitterness in his tone stung, but I refused to react to it. It's both our problem, Daniel. Your family's well-being is always my concern, regardless of property titles. He nodded curtly, already sliding into crisis management mode. I'll call you later with details. I watched him hurry out of the cafe, his coffee abandoned on the table. Our conversation had been interrupted yet again, this time by a literal fire rather than a figurative one. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I walked to my car, my phone rang. Catherine's number. How did it go? She asked when I answered. Unresolved, I replied. There was a fire at the house. Daniel had to leave. A fire? Is everyone okay? Yes, thankfully. Jenny found it when she came home for lunch. Sounds like it was contained to the kitchen, but there's smoke damage. Catherine was quiet. For a moment. You realize what this means, don't you? That I'll need to file an insurance claim? That you'll be dealing with contractors, inspections, repairs, all involving direct communication with Daniel and Jenny. The universe has a twisted sense of humor, Margaret. You bought the house to create boundaries, and now those very boundaries have gone up in smoke. Literally. As Catherine's words sank in, I pulled over to the side of the road, suddenly needing to be still. She was right. The property that was supposed to clarify our relationship would now entangle us in a new set of complications. Landlord and tenant, mother and son, boundaries and obligations, all blurring together in the aftermath of an unexpected crisis. The revelation hit me with the force of physical impact. There was no clean separation possible. No neat division between my role as Daniel's mother and my new position as his landlord. The fire had exposed the fundamental flaw in my plan. I couldn't compartmentalize my life or my relationships through property deeds or lease agreements. Reality was messier, more interconnected than I had allowed myself to acknowledge. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, breathing deeply. This wasn't just a complication, it was a turning point. How I responded to this crisis would define not just my relationship with Daniel going forward, but my relationship with myself, with the woman I was becoming in this unfamiliar landscape of self-determination. Margaret, are you still there? Catherine's voice called me back to the present. Yes, I said, straightening. I need to go to the house. As the landlord or as the mother? She asked gently. I thought about Daniel's parting words. the accusation beneath them, the hurt child still visible beneath the professional exterior. Both, I replied. I am both. The colonial house looked deceptively normal from the outside. Only the lingering scent of smoke in the air and the water-stained driveway hinted at what had happened. I parked behind Daniel's car and sat for a moment, gathering my thoughts. This wasn't how I had envisioned my first visit as the official owner. A fire truck was still present, though the emergency appeared to be over. 2 firefighters were speaking with Daniel in the front yard, one gesturing toward the roof while the other made notes on a clipboard. Jenny stood on the porch, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her usually perfect posture now rigid with tension. I took a deep breath and stepped out of my car, unsure of my role in this tableau. Mother? Landlord? Both? Jenny spotted me first, her expression flickering between relief and wariness. "Margaret," she called, walking down the steps to meet me. "You didn't have to come." "Of course I did," I replied. "What happened?" She pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her polished appearance slightly disheveled. "The electric range. Something about a wiring issue. We've complained about it sparking for weeks, but the property management company—" She stopped, abruptly, seeming to remember that the property management company was no longer responsible. I was. "Go on," I encouraged gently. "They kept saying they'd send someone, but no one ever came." She glanced toward Daniel, still deep in conversation with the firefighters. "I left a casserole warming in the oven before heading to work. When I came home for lunch to get some files, the smoke alarms were going off and the kitchen was filled with smoke." My heart clenched at the thought of what might have happened if Jenny hadn't returned when she did. "Thank God you came home," I said, meaning it. She nodded, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "The fire department said it could have been much worse." Daniel approached, his expression guarded as he registered my presence. "Mom, you got here quickly." "I was already in the car when Catherine called," I explained. "What did the firefighters say?" "The fire was electrical, started behind the range. They've shut off power to that section of the house until an electrician can check the wiring." He ran a hand through his hair. "They're clearing us to go back inside now, though they recommend professional cleaning for the smoke damage." I nodded, mentally cataloging what needed to be done. "Insurance should cover most of it. I'll make some calls." Jenny glanced between us uncertainly. "I need to pick up the kids from school soon. They can't stay here with the smoke smell, especially James with his asthma." "We'll get a hotel room," Daniel said firmly. "There's that extended stay place near my office." I hesitated, then spoke. "Or you could all stay with me at Catherine's. She has plenty of room and she already offered when I told her what happened." Surprise registered on both their faces, genuine, unfiltered surprise that made me realize how rarely I had established the terms of our interactions in recent months. "That's kind of her," Jenny said carefully. "But we wouldn't want to impose. It wouldn't be an imposition. Catherine loves children, and our house is practically a wonderland of interesting collections and plants." I found myself smiling at the thought of Lily and James exploring Catherine's eclectic home. "The guest suite has a king bed for you two, and there's a sunroom with a day bed that would be perfect for the children." Daniel and Jenny exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. "Just until the smoke damage is addressed," I added. "A few days at most." "Let me discuss it with Jenny," Daniel said, placing a hand on his wife's elbow and steering her a few steps away. I watched them confer in low voices, their body language broadcasting the awkwardness of the situation. My son and his wife, weighing the discomfort of staying with the mother-turned-landlord against the convenience and cost savings it represented. While they deliberated, I walked cautiously toward the front door, which stood open to air out the house. From the threshold I could see into the kitchen, the charred remnants of the range, the smoke-blackened walls, the water damage on the hardwood floors. The damage was significant, but localized, thankfully. The house smelled of smoke and chemicals, from the fire extinguishers. Beneath those acrid odors, I detected something else, the lingering aroma of whatever had been in the oven. Lasagna, perhaps, or shepherd's pie. A home-cooked meal Jenny had prepared before work, expecting to return to a warm house and a simple dinner with her family. Something shifted in my perspective as I stood there. This wasn't just my investment property. It was their home, filled with their routines and expectations, their small daily kindnesses to each other. The realization didn't negate my reasons for buying the house, but it added a dimension I hadn't fully considered. "Mom?" I turned to find Daniel standing behind me. "We'd like to take you up on Catherine's offer, if it's still open, just for a night or two until we can arrange for cleanup." "Of course," I said, relieved. "I'll call her now and let her know." As I stepped outside to make the call, I noticed Jenny gathering items from the house: clothing, toiletries, James's stuffed dinosaur, that he couldn't sleep without. She moved with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing crises, her earlier tension transformed into purposeful action. Catherine answered on the second ring. "Let me guess, you're calling about house guests?" "If the offer still stands," I said, "it would just be for a night or two." "Of course it stands," Catherine replied warmly. "I've already put fresh sheets on the beds and found some children's books in the attic. Richard's grandnieces used to visit, remember?" A wave of gratitude washed over me. "You're a lifesaver, Catherine." "No, I'm a retired English teacher with too much space and too few visitors. Bring them over whenever they're ready." After ending the call, I rejoined Daniel and Jenny, who were loading items into their car. "Catherine says everything's ready whenever you are," I told them. "She's looking forward to the company." Jenny nodded, some of her customary poise returning. "We need to get the children first. I don't want them seeing the house like this." "I understand," I said. "I'll head over to Catherine's now and help her prepare. Just come when you're ready." As I drove away from the Colonial, my mind churned with conflicting emotions. The fire had created a situation I never anticipated, one where my role as mother and grandmother was suddenly realigned with my position as property owner. The clean break I had envisioned had been complicated by circumstances beyond anyone's control. But perhaps that was the point. Life wasn't a series of clean breaks and fresh starts. It was messy, interconnected, resistant to rigid boundaries. The fire hadn't just exposed faulty wiring. It had revealed the faulty wiring in my own thinking, the belief that I could redefine my relationship with Daniel through a property deed. At a stoplight, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed different somehow, not younger or older, but more present, more integrated. I had spent months feeling fractured, torn between the mother I had always been and the independent woman I wanted to become. Now, facing a crisis that demanded both aspects of myself, I felt the first stirrings of a new wholeness. Catherine was waiting on her porch when I arrived, a mug of tea in her hands and a knowing smile on her face. "So," she said as I climbed the steps, "the universe called your bluff." I sank into the wicker chair beside her, suddenly exhausted. "It certainly did." "And how do you feel about having your son's family under your roof again? Or at least a roof you've arranged?" I considered the question carefully. Conflicted, but also clearer. Catherine raised an eyebrow, waiting for me to elaborate. "I thought I needed to choose between being Daniel's mother and being my own person," I explained. "But maybe the real choice is how I mother, not whether I mother." She nodded, passing me her mug of tea. I took a grateful sip, the warmth steadying me. "The fire is forcing us to interact without our usual patterns," I continued. "Daniel can't take me for granted when I'm offering emergency housing. I can't avoid difficult conversations when there's a crisis to manage. We're seeing each other differently because circumstances demand it." "Crises have a way of burning away pretense," Catherine agreed. No pun intended. Despite everything, I laughed. You're terrible. I'm honest. There's a difference. She reclaimed her mug. So, what happens now? Do you fix the house and continue as their landlord? Sell it and wash your hands of the whole experiment? I don't know yet, I admitted. But for the first time in months, I feel like I have choices that don't require me to diminish myself. Catherine studied me for a moment, then nodded approvingly. That, my friend, is what growth looks like. We spent the next hour preparing for our unexpected guests, making up beds, clearing space in the refrigerator, setting out fresh towels in the bathroom. Catherine unearthed a box of children's games from her teaching days, arranging them invitingly on the sunroom shelf. As we worked, I found myself humming softly, an old habit I had nearly forgotten. The tune was one my mother used to sing while preparing for company, a gentle melody that spoke of welcome and care. It rose from some deep, authentic part of myself that remained unchanged despite recent months of self-discovery and assertion. I could be both, I realized. The nurturing mother and the self-respecting woman, the caregiver and the property owner, the past I had lived and the future I was creating. These weren't opposing forces but dimensions of a whole person, a person who was, at long last, coming into focus. When Daniel's car pulled into Catherine's driveway later that afternoon, I walked out to meet them not with anxiety or defensiveness, but with a quiet confidence. Whatever happened next, whatever complications arose from the fire and its aftermath, I would face them as this integrated self, this woman who had finally learned that caring for others and caring for herself were not mutually exclusive endeavors. The inner transformation wasn't complete. Such journeys never are. But a threshold had been crossed. I had stepped into a new understanding of myself, one that no property deed or lease agreement could fully capture. As Lily ran toward me, arms outstretched for a hug, I opened myself to the complicated joy of this moment. "Grandma," she called, "we're having a sleepover at your friend's house." "Yes, sweetheart," I said, embracing her. "We're all having a sleepover." The path forward wasn't clear yet, but for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of the uncertainty. Whatever came next, I would meet it not as the woman I had been, or even the woman I aspired to be, but as the woman I was becoming, whole, complicated, and finally, irrevocably, my own. Catherine's home quickly transformed from peaceful sanctuary to lively household. Lily and James adapted with remarkable resilience, discovering vintage board games and the magical garden with its hidden stone paths. "Your friend is weird," Lily informed me as I brushed her hair. "But good weird, like in fairy tales where the witch is actually nice." Catherine, passing by the doorway, gave an exaggerated bow, embracing the comparison. By noon, I had coordinated the repairs for the colonial. The insurance would cover most damages. Smoke remediation would begin tomorrow, though electrical work would take longer. I found Jenny in the kitchen preparing lunch. "The restoration company starts tomorrow," I told her. 3 to 4 days for smoke cleanup. They'll repair the kitchen circuit for essential appliances until the full electrical work is completed. She nodded, tension visibly leaving her shoulders. "Thank you for handling all that." "It's my responsibility as the property owner," I replied, the words feeling strange on my tongue. Jenny hesitated, then set down her knife. "Margaret, I want to apologize. Not just about the babysitting, but for how we've treated you generally. Daniel and I got caught up in our own ambitions and lost sight of what matters." Her independent gesture surprised me. I had expected Daniel to lead any reconciliation. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." Later, while the children napped and Jenny worked, Catherine and I settled on the porch with tea. "You seem different today," she observed. "More settled." "I think I've stopped fighting with myself," I replied. "For months, I've been torn between the person I've always been and the person I thought I needed to become." That afternoon, I drafted a comprehensive plan at Catherine's desk. I organized repairs for the colonial and established clear landlord boundaries. More importantly, I created a personal framework, scheduled grandparent time balanced with protected periods for my own pursuits. I outlined art classes, volunteer work, weekend trips I'd always postponed. I drafted a proposal for Daniel and Jenny. A new family relationship based on mutual respect rather than convenience. It affirmed my commitment while clearly stating my boundaries. This was something I'd never permitted myself before. A life of my own design that included my role as mother and grandmother on my terms. When Daniel returned from work, I tucked my plans away. The time wasn't right for these discussions, not with repairs pending and emotions raw. But having the plan prepared gave me a sense of agency I hadn't felt in years. That evening, I updated everyone on the restoration timeline. You should be able to move back in by Monday, though the kitchen won't be fully functional for another week. Daniel nodded. I appreciate you handling all that, Mom. And thank you both for letting us stay, he added, including Catherine. It's no trouble, Catherine replied. Your children are delightful. Lily's been helping classify my shell collection, and James appointed himself official garden inspector. A genuine smile, the first since our confrontation, softened Daniel's features. They do seem happy here. They're adaptable, Jenny noted. It's a good quality. Like their grandmother, Catherine remarked, giving me a significant look. Daniel caught the exchange and straightened. Mom, I've been thinking about everything. The house, the babysitting, all of it. I want you to know I understand why you felt you had to take such dramatic measures. I waited, sensing he had more to say. I didn't see it, Daniel continued, voice uncharacteristically hesitant. How we were treating you. Taking advantage. It took something this dramatic for me to actually pay attention. The silence that followed felt weighted with years of unspoken tensions. Jenny reached for Daniel's hand, offering silent support. I was invisible, I said finally. Present, but unseen. Needed, but not valued. Daniel flinched slightly. We didn't mean to make you feel that way. I know, I acknowledged, but impact matters more than intention. Catherine excused herself with remarkable tact, mentioning evening tea preparations. As she left, she squeezed my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that gave me strength. When did it start? Daniel asked. This feeling of being used. I considered the question carefully. It was gradual, each small assumption, each unacknowledged sacrifice. The day you texted that Jenny had a work crisis when you were actually at a restaurant. The rainy Tuesday when Lily was left waiting because you forgot to tell me about early dismissal. Recognition dawned in Jenny's eyes. I remember that day. Lily was upset. Not as upset as I was, I admitted. That's when I realized I wasn't being treated as family, but as a resource to be deployed when convenient. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on knees. So you bought our house? I did, I confirmed, meeting his gaze steadily. It was extreme. Perhaps unnecessarily so, but after months of being powerless, I needed to change the dynamic dramatically. By becoming our landlord, he said, an edge creeping into his tone. By establishing a boundary you couldn't ignore, I corrected. By creating consequences for treating me as an afterthought. Jenny spoke up, surprising me again. She's right, Daniel. We've been taking advantage of your mother for months. Free childcare, meal preparation, housekeeping. We just expected it all without question. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that reminded me so much of his father. I get it. I do. But buying the house, Mom? Changing the locks on our life without warning? I gave warnings, I countered softly. For months, I tried to communicate my exhaustion, my need for consideration. You didn't listen. So this was punishment? This was self-preservation. Our eyes locked across Catherine's living room, mother and son seeing each other clearly, perhaps for the first time in years. The hurt child within him confronting the wounded parent within me. "I still need you, Mom," he said finally, voice cracking slightly. "The kids need you, but not like before, not at your expense." Something long knotted within me began to loosen. Not forgiveness exactly. That would take time, but the beginning of understanding. "I need you too," I admitted, "but as equals, as adults who respect each other's boundaries." Jenny wiped away a tear. "We can do better. We will do better." The first tentative framework of reconciliation took shape between us, fragile but real. Not an erasure of what had happened, but an acknowledgement of it. Not a return to how things were, but a careful building of something new. Outside, the autumn wind rustled Catherine's garden, stirring the wind chimes into gentle music. Change was in the air, not just the seasons turning, but lives realigning around newfound truths. 3 weeks after the fire, the colonial house was transformed. Fresh paint covered the smoke-stained walls, new wiring had replaced the faulty circuits, and a gleaming stainless steel range stood where the old one had sparked its last. The restoration company had done exceptional work, leaving the house not just repaired but improved. I walked through the empty kitchen, running my hand along the cool granite countertop. The insurance had covered most repairs, but I had chosen to invest additional funds in upgrades, not as the indulgent mother, but as the practical property owner. Better appliances meant fewer maintenance headaches. Upgraded electrical meant safer living conditions for my grandchildren. Daniel appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. We had fallen into a new routine during the renovation process. Meeting weekly to review progress, discuss decisions, and gradually rebuild our relationship alongside the house. "The inspector signed off on everything," he said, holding up the final paperwork. "We can move back in tomorrow." "That's wonderful," I replied, genuinely pleased. The past weeks at Catherine's had been healing for all of us, but it was time for life to resume its normal rhythms, albeit with significant adjustments. Daniel hesitated, then crossed to join me by the window. "Mom, before we move back, I want to be clear about something. This house," he gestured around us, "it's yours. You bought it fair and square, but it's also our home. I'm hoping we can find a balance that respects both those truths." I nodded, appreciating his directness. "That's what I want too." "Jenny and I have talked a lot about this," he continued. "We've created a schedule for the children that doesn't rely on you for daily care. 3 afternoons a week at most, and never without asking first. No last-minute requests unless it's a genuine emergency." The proposal aligned remarkably well with the boundaries I had outlined in my own planning. "That sounds reasonable," I said. "And we want you to join us for Sunday dinner every week. Not to cook, we'll handle that, but just to be together as family." I smiled, warming to this vision of a recalibrated relationship. "I'd like that very much." Daniel leaned against the counter, his posture more relaxed than I had seen in months. "The kids miss you at Willow Creek. They keep asking when they can visit Grandma's new place." "Anytime," I said, meaning it. "The apartment is ready. It's not as spacious as Catherine's, but there's a community garden and a playground nearby." We stood together in comfortable silence, watching through the window as autumn leaves drifted across the newly repaired driveway. So much had changed. Since that day, I traced the armrest in my rocking chair, contemplating drastic measures. "The rose bushes need pruning," Daniel observed, nodding toward the overgrown garden. "Dad always said fall pruning prepares for spring growth." He was right, I replied softly. Some things need to be cut back before they can flourish properly. Daniel glanced at me, catching the metaphor. "I think we're going to be okay, Mom." It wasn't a perfect resolution. Life rarely offers those. But it was an honest beginning. The house around us stood repaired and renewed. The relationship between us had followed a similar path, damaged but rebuilt with greater awareness and stronger foundations. As we walked out together, I noted with quiet satisfaction that Daniel didn't ask when I would be available to watch the children next. Instead, he simply said, "Let us know what day works for you to see the apartment." Small changes, but significant ones. The start of something new, growing from the ashes of what had been. 6 months had passed since I became the owner of my son's rental house. Spring had arrived, bringing renewal to gardens and relationships alike. My Willow Creek apartment had become truly home. Bookshelves filled with novels I'd finally found time to read, and a small desk holding my laptop and journal. I'd even begun writing a column for the community newsletter called Perspectives from the Third Act. The doorbell rang, announcing Daniel's arrival. Unusually, he came alone, carrying a canvas tote bag and looking nervous. "No Jenny and the kids?" I asked. "They're coming later. I wanted to talk to you first." We settled on the balcony with glasses of iced tea I'd prepared. Daniel set the bag on the table. "Remember the rose bushes at the Colonial? I've been caring for them since the renovation." He withdrew a small clay pot containing a tiny rose plant. "This is a cutting from the strongest bush. I thought you might want it for your balcony." The gesture moved me deeply. Not just the plant, but the thought behind it. "It's perfect," I said. "Thank you." "There's something else," he continued. "Jenny and I want to buy the Colonial from you. At fair market value, of course. We've saved for a proper down payment. No shortcuts or manipulation this time." I considered his proposal. The original purpose of buying the house had been fulfilled. Our relationship reset, boundaries established, respect restored. "I think that could work," I replied. "As a proper business transaction between equals?" Relief spread across Daniel's face. "That's exactly what I was hoping for." When Jenny arrived later with the children, they found us discussing garden plans for the Colonial. Lily climbed into my lap, chattering about soccer, while James examined the rose plant with 4-year-old seriousness. As the evening unfolded with genuine laughter and easy conversation, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but a circle properly closed, allowing a new one to begin. The tiny rose sat on my balcony, catching the sunset light, a living symbol of what had been broken, healed, and finally allowed to grow in new directions. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.